Number 3. The Cleveland Elementary School Shooting. Brenda Ann Spencer was born in San Diego, California on April 3, 1962. Her parents split up when she was 10 years old. Her father, Wallace, got custody of her and her 2 older siblings. Brenda said her home life was dysfunctional. She did not see her mother much. She claimed her father physically and sexually abused her. She said they both slept on a mattress on the living room floor. People who went to school with Brenda thought of her as a quiet tomboy. One classmate said she was, quote, too small to be scary. But not everyone thought she was harmless. Her neighbors noticed some disturbing behavior from her, like she beheaded her Barbie dolls. Brenda did well in school, and she was an honor student. In 1979, Brenda Spencer was 16 years old and living in a San Diego, California suburb. She lived across the street from Cleveland Elementary School. Around 8:30 a.m. on Monday, January 29, 1979, children were waiting outside the school to be let in for their day of classes. Brenda grabbed her .22 caliber rifle with mounted scope and, from inside her home, she aimed it at the children. The gun was a Christmas gift from her father, Wallace. 9-year-old Cam Miller was shot first. Brenda later said she chose him because he was wearing blue, her favorite color. She continued to shoot children. The school's principal, 53-year-old Burton Regg, was inside the school when the shooting started. He heard what he thought were firecrackers exploding. But he realized what was happening once he saw a little girl fall to the ground. As he ran into the yard, Brenda shot him once in the chest and he collapsed. The school's custodian, 56-year-old Mike Sakar, also ran out to help. Brenda shot him as well. School staff led students into the auditorium and told them to stay low and be quiet. The police quickly arrived on the scene. The first responding officer, 28-year-old Robert Robb, was shot in the neck. Once the police determined that the shots were coming from Brenda's home, they placed a garbage truck in front of her house to block her line of sight. This move bought the police time to transport injured children away from the scene. Brenda refused to come out of her house and a standoff ensued. A reporter from the San Diego Tribune had a list of phone numbers of houses in the school's neighborhood. He was looking for witnesses to the shooting and decided to call a house across the road from the school. A young woman answered the phone and identified herself as Brenda. The reporter asked her if she knew anything about the shooting. She said she had seen the entire thing. The reporter then asked her who the shooter was. She said it was a 16-year-old kid who lived at 6356 Lake Atkin Avenue. The reporter thought that this was odd because he had called the house at that address. He said, "Isn't that your address?" Brenda laughed and said, "Sure, who do you think did it?" She then hung up the phone. The reporter called her back and Brenda answered the phone again. He then asked her why she was doing this. She supposedly said, "I just started shooting. That's it. I just did it for the fun of it. I just don't like Mondays. Do you like Mondays? I did this because it's a way to cheer up the day. Nobody likes Mondays." SWAT teams had arrived on the scene and positioned snipers on a neighbor's roof. After 6 hours, Brenda Spencer agreed to surrender. In the shooting, which only took 15 minutes, Brenda fired 36 rounds. 11 shots hit their targets. 8 children were injured, but none of them were severely wounded, and they all survived. 28-year-old police officer Robert Robb also survived. The school's principal, 53-year-old Burton Regg, and the custodian, 56-year-old Michael Sakar, both succumbed to their injuries. Brenda Spencer was charged with 2 counts of murder. 9 attempted murder charges were dismissed. Brenda's defense team claimed she was mentally and emotionally sick, and they urged the judge to try her as a juvenile. They also told the court that Brenda had epilepsy. The judge was not persuaded, and it was decided that Brenda would be tried as an adult. On October 1st, 1979, 16-year-old Brenda Spencer pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 25 years to life. Brenda was first eligible for parole in 1993. During her parole hearing, she talked about the sexual abuse she suffered as a child, hoping that would foster some sympathy. But her parole was denied. She applied for parole several more times over the next few decades. The Cleveland Elementary School shooting is considered the first modern school shooting. At Brenda's 2001 parole hearing, she said, "With every school shooting, I feel I'm partially responsible. What if they got the idea from what I did?" During her 2009 parole hearing, Brenda claimed that the 1979 shooting was a suicide attempt. She claimed that when she started shooting, she did not intend to hit anyone, and she wanted the police to respond and kill her. Brenda's most recent parole hearing was on August 18, 2022. She was once again denied parole. Besides being considered the first modern school shooter, another legacy from the shooting is Brenda Spencer's "I Just Don't Like Mondays" quote. The quote became the basis for the song "I Don't Like Mondays" by the Irish new wave band the Boomtown Rats. The song was a hit in the UK and received moderate airplay in the United States. However, Brenda does not remember saying the line to the reporter. In a 1993 interview, Brenda claimed that her memories from that day were fragmented. She said she had spent the previous week binging on alcohol and PCP. She claims that she was hallucinating when she fired the shots at the school. However, toxicology testing on her urine that was done in the wake of the shooting indicated there were no drugs or alcohol in her system. Cleveland Elementary School closed in 1983 due to low enrollment. The site was used as a private school in subsequent years. A plaque memorializing the victims was installed at the school. The site was put up for sale in 2015, and the school was demolished in 2018. A new housing development has since taken its place. The plaque was moved to the former southern edge of the school's property. At the time of this video, 62-year-old Brenda Ann Spencer is serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. She'll next be eligible for parole in 2025. Number 2. The Montreal Massacre. Marc Lépine was born Guillaume Gabary in Montreal, Quebec in 1964. Lépine's parents' marriage was an abusive one. His mother divorced his father after she found evidence of an affair. His mother got full custody of him and his younger sister. After his parents split up, Lépine's father wasn't in his life much. When he was 14, he started using the name Marc Lépine. Lépine was his mother's maiden name. He legally changed his name when he was 18 years old. In high school, Lépine was a good student, but he was socially inept. He was generally considered a loner. Lépine tried to enlist in the military when he was 17. He was interviewed, but was determined he was unsuitable. Lépine applied several times to get into the engineering school at École Polytechnique, a university in Montreal. In his first attempt in 1982, Lépine took pre-university CE-GEP classes at a local community school. CE-GEP is only available in Quebec, and it provides first-level post-secondary education at a public school. Lépine failed 2 of his classes and he switched programs. In 1986, he dropped out entirely. Even though he had dropped out, he applied at École Polytechnique. He was rejected for not having enough credits. That same year, Lépine moved into his own apartment in Montreal. Those close to him thought that moving into an apartment alone made him more isolated and detached. His mother got him a job serving food in the cafeteria at the hospital where she worked. At the time, Lépine had terrible acne. Because of his acne, some people were disgusted that he was serving food, and they complained. So he was given a new job, washing dishes in the back. Lepine eventually took another crack at academia. He switched disciplines by enrolling in a controlled data program at a private institute in Montreal. The program appealed to him because students were able to work alone. However, he floundered and eventually dropped out of the program. Around this time, Lepine's few friends and acquaintances noticed his negative attitude towards women had become more overt. Lepine didn't like women and labeled them feminists. He felt that women were creeping into spaces reserved for men like policing and engineering. His constant insecurity didn't help. By 1989, 25-year-old Marc Lepine seemed to be going nowhere in life. He spent a lot of his time watching war movies. He did find a connection with people at Checkmate Sports, a local gun shop. To Lepine, Checkmate felt more like a boys' club. He could hang out there and be around other gun enthusiasts. In September 1989, Lepine applied for a firearms acquisition permit. About a month later, he received the permit. In November 1989, he purchased a Ruger Mini 14 assault rifle. On multiple occasions, Lepine was seen wandering around École Polytechnique in late November and early December. December 6, 1989 started off as a normal day at École Polytechnique de Montréal. It was the last day of classes before Christmas break. Around 5 p.m., 25-year-old Marc Lepine entered the school dressed in dark clothes. He was carrying his Ruger Mini 14 rifle with 2 clips and a hunting knife. Lepine entered a crowded mechanical engineering classroom in order for the men and women to separate. Initially, the students thought it was a prank. But then Lepine shot into the ceiling twice and shouted, "You are all feminists." He ordered the approximately 50 men to leave the room while the female students stayed. The 9 female students pleaded with him not to harm them, but Lepine opened fire on the group of women. Some were shot directly, and others were hit by bullets that ricocheted off the walls. Hélène Colgan, Nathalie Crochu, Barbara Degonon, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Pelletier, and Annie Sayrand were all killed. Another 3 women were injured. After shooting the women, Lepine left the class. Lepine headed to a bank of photocopiers on the 2nd floor. He shot a male and 2 female students. His gun then jammed. Lepine managed to unjam his gun and fired at another woman on the escalator. She was shot but managed to run away. Lepine then went to the finance department and shot the next victim, 25-year-old budget clerk Maryse Lagunière, through a window. She died as a result of her wounds. Lepine's next stop was a cafeteria on the ground floor where there were 100 students. He opened fire and killed 31-year-old nursing student Barbara Kliznik. He shot another student, but she survived. Lepine walked through the cafeteria and then came to a storage room. That's where he encountered Anne-Marie Edward and Genevieve Bergeron, who were both 21-year-old students. Bergeron was studying civil engineering, and Edward was a chemical engineering student. He shot them both to death. Lepine then went to the 3rd floor and shot a female and 2 male students. He then entered the classroom where a materials engineering class was being held. 23-year-old Maurice Leclerc was giving a presentation. Once again, Lepine told the men to get out. He then shot Leclerc. He turned his gun on the class. Some were trying to flee and others were hiding under desks. 29-year-old Maud Evernique and 21-year-old Michel Richard were killed as they tried to run away. 20-year-old Annie Turcotte was shot to death as she tried to hide. Lepine noticed that Maurice Leclerc was still alive. He pulled out his knife and stabbed her 3 times as she begged for help. She died from her injuries. At 5:12 p.m., the first call came into 911. Police arrived within minutes and cordoned off building entrances. 28 officers surrounded the building. Inside, Lepine decided his rampage was over and he turned his gun on himself. At 5:35 p.m., the police learned that the gunman had shot himself and they entered the building. 14 women were killed and 13 people were injured, including 4 men, in one of Canada's deadliest mass shootings. The massacre shocked the city of Montreal. Many of the citizens were directly affected by the shooting. Montreal police officer Pierre Leclerc responded to the scene and discovered that his daughter, Maryse, was one of the victims. The whole nation also mourned. Canada's then Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, attended the funeral services. Lepine wrote a letter on the day of the massacre, and it was found in one of his pockets. It was released to the public a year later. In the letter, Lepine blamed feminists for ruining his life. The note also contained the list of 19 other women he labeled radical feminists whom he wanted to kill. There were high-profile women in Quebec, such as journalists, politicians, television personalities, and union leaders. The shooting at École Polytechnique has since been called the Montreal Massacre. The event sparked debates about violence against women and gun control in Canada. Several Montrealers formed the Coalition for Gun Control. Their aim was for safer gun restrictions and to ensure this tragedy never happens again. The coalition found success. They all passed Bill C-68, the federal firearms control legislation. The bill contained stricter rules for owning a firearm and mandatory background checks. In 1991, the Canadian Parliament declared December 6 as the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. While the Montreal Massacre shaped debates about feminism and gun control, it did not settle them. More than 30 years later, these problems persist in the Western world. In recent years, we've seen the rise of incels, who are men that are involuntarily celibate. The Anti-Defamation League defines incels as heterosexual men who blame women and society for their lack of romantic success. Marc Lepine is often considered a prototypical incel. Incels have even gone as far as to celebrate Lepine in his sickening actions. For example, in the late 2010s, some incels in Canada wanted the anniversary of the massacre, December 6, to be celebrated as St. Marc Lepine Day instead of the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. This was after April 2018, when 25-year-old Alec Manassian drove a van onto a sidewalk in Toronto, Ontario, Canada to kill women intentionally. He killed 11 people, including 9 women, and injured another 16 people. It was labeled an act of misogynistic terrorism. Manassian was angry because he felt rejected by women. He said that other incels inspired him. Even though their crimes were committed 30 years apart, many people see parallels between Lepine and Manassian. Unfortunately, according to experts, the threat of incel violence is only getting worse. Number 1. The Dunblane Massacre. The people of Dunblane, Scotland thought that Thomas Hamilton was odd. Children called him Mr. Creepy, and adults called him Spock. They suspected something was wrong with him. In 1974, 22-year-old Thomas was dismissed as a leader of a local Boy Scouts troop. Parents complained about his inappropriate behavior with the children. 4 Scottish police forces investigated a dozen complaints and accusations against him, but they could not make a case against him. Thomas fought back by writing letters petitioning for his reinstatement. His attempts ultimately failed. The Scouts claimed they fired Thomas because he was an incompetent leader. According to them, Thomas took campers out in extreme weather where they had to sleep in a van. Years later, in the 1980s, Thomas started a boys' club, the Dunblane Rovers, where he hoped to turn young boys, ages 7 to 11, into athletes. But the rumors of inappropriate actions continued to follow him. The local council in Dunblane tried to stop him from running these meetings at a high school, but they failed. The local government ombudsman believed that the allegations were too vague. After all, Hamilton had never been charged, let alone convicted, of a crime. Only one serious accusation surfaced in a few decades, but nothing came of it. Despite his poor public perception, Thomas had the support of some local council people and police officers. Some parents even spoke up on his behalf. Thomas dared people to come forward with their accusations publicly. Thomas also seemed to like to taunt people with his behavior. For example, he photographed topless boys puffing out their chest and then hung their photos in his home, clearly visible to his neighbors. Neighbors thought that this was strange and offensive, but not criminal. Thomas claimed he instilled discipline in the boys he worked with by teaching them soccer, gymnastics, and shooting. He confronted anyone he thought spoke behind his back. Thomas claimed the accusations were part of a witch hunt that damaged his reputation and his shop. He owned a shop that sold DIY goods and supplies and fitted kitchens. The rumors never went away. Rumors and scandals surrounded Thomas Hamilton's family since before he was born. Thomas's mother, Agnes, was the illegitimate child of Rachel Hamilton. To avoid embarrassment, Agnes was given to childless relatives, James and Catherine Hamilton, who raised her as their own daughter. In 1950, when Agnes was 19, she married a local bus driver, Thomas Watt. Their son, also named Thomas Watt, was born in 1952 in Glasgow. 18 months later, Watt abandoned his family to run off with another woman. Faced with another scandal, James and Catherine, who raised Thomas's mother, legally adopted Thomas and raised him as their son. Thomas's name was legally changed to Thomas Watt Hamilton. They treated Agnes as his older sister. Growing up, Thomas did not know the truth about his family's lineage. His adoptive parents told him the truth when he was 22 years old. To this day, Thomas's biological father, Thomas Watt, denies that Thomas was his son. More police inquiries followed throughout the late 1980s and early 90s, but the police could never find enough evidence to charge Thomas Hamilton. The police raided the camps where he stayed with the young boys. Photography shops refused to develop his photos. Many people didn't like the nature of his photos, but they were not obscene enough to be charged with any crimes. However, some councils banned Thomas from using their schools to make films with young boys. Thomas Hamilton was also an avid gun collector. He had a firearms license and 6 guns registered. Because of his reputation, gun clubs refused to let him join. The constant rejection from society gnawed at Thomas. Around 9:30 a.m. on March 13, 1996, Thomas Hamilton drove to the Dunblane Elementary School. The 43-year-old cut the telephone lines and entered the school with 4 handguns and 743 rounds of ammunition. He made sure to wear shooting earmuffs. Thomas fired a few shots as he made his way to the gym. At that moment, the Primary 1 class, comprised of 5 and 6-year-olds, was in the gym with their teacher, Gwen Mayer. There were 29 students. Thomas stormed into the gym and immediately opened fire. He shot at the phys ed teacher, Elaine Harold, and teaching assistant Mary Blake, wounding the educators. The class's teacher, Gwen Mayer, tried to shield the children from the bullets. Tragically, the 43-year-old mother of 2 was killed. Thomas then opened fire on the children. Harold and Blake took as many children as possible and hid them in cupboards in the gym. As other teachers and older students came to the gym to check what was going on, Thomas fired at them and they ran away. Thomas dropped the gun he was using and pulled out another gun. He used it to shoot himself in the head, killing himself instantly. The mass shooting only took about 5 minutes. The principal called the police from the school around 9:43 a.m. Police responded to the scene at 9:57 a.m. As word spread, parents rushed to the school, hoping to find their children. In the aftermath, 1 adult and 16 children were dead at the school. 1 died later in the hospital. 15 more, including 13 children, were injured. Of the 29 students in the class, only 1 was not injured or killed. All but 1 of the children who were murdered were 5 years old, and the other was 6. The victims were Victoria Elizabeth Clydesdale, Emma Elizabeth Crozier, Melissa Helen Curry, Charlie Louise Dunn, Kevin Allen Hassel, Ross William Irvine, David Charles Kerr, Mari Isabel Macbeth, Red McKinnon, Abigail Joanne McClellan, Emily Morden, Sophie Jane Lockwood North, Sean Petrie, Joanna Caroline Ross, Hannah Louise Scott, and Megan Turner. The adult who was killed was their teacher, 44-year-old Gwen Mayer. 43-year-old Thomas Hamilton was cremated in a private family service. Police never determined a motive for why he targeted the school. What is known is that Thomas was an angry man who often felt rejected and ostracized by his community. An inquiry found that Thomas had planned the massacre for months. A week before the shooting, Thomas wrote a letter to the Queen complaining that the Boy Scouts had sullied his reputation. The tragic events in Dunblane shocked the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth attended a memorial service and visited surviving children in the hospital. Then Prime Minister John Major and Labour leader Tony Blair visited the site and joined in a vigil with the community. In April 1996, a month after the shooting, the gym where the shooting took place was demolished and a garden was put in its place. After the tragic events, the residents of Dunblane initiated the Snowdrop campaign to force changes in the UK's gun laws. The campaign gathered over 750,000 signatures. In February 1997, the British Parliament passed legislation banning the ownership of guns over .22 caliber. When Labour leader Tony Blair became Prime Minister in May 1997, he took the legislation further. In November of that year, private ownership of all handguns in the United Kingdom was banned. Also, security requirements for gun clubs were expanded. The British Parliament passed the laws by a wide margin. The following year saw a dramatic decrease in firearm deaths in the United Kingdom. There have been no school shootings in the United Kingdom since the tragic events of March 13, 1996. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.